2014, Evinrude built an outboard so radical it looked like it came off a spaceship. It promised more power, better fuel economy, and no oil changes. Ever. Boaters thought it could change the game. 6 years later, it was dead. This is the story of how one of the boldest outboards ever made went from revolution to extinction in record time, and you won't want to miss the end. More than a century before the G2 shocked the boating world, Evinrude had already made history. Did you know the modern outboard was born because of a melting tub of ice cream? In 1907, Ole Evinrude rowed across a lake in Wisconsin on a sweltering day to get a treat for his sweetheart. By the time he returned, it had melted, and he decided there had to be a better way. His solution was a small, detachable boat motor, and it changed boating forever. From that moment on, Evinrude outboards became a staple in marinas, fishing camps, and racing circuits. They powered everything from military craft to high-speed competition boats, earning a reputation for strength and reliability. But by the late 20th century, the industry was changing fast. Emissions regulations in the United States and Europe were forcing cleaner, more efficient designs, and most companies abandoned two-strokes entirely for heavier, quieter four-strokes. Evinrude refused to follow the herd. In 2003, they introduced E-TEC, an advanced direct-injection two-stroke that met strict emission standards while keeping the light weight, torque, and simplicity boaters loved. It was a lifeline for two-strokes, and for a while it worked. Still, by the early 2010s, competition was catching up. Four-strokes were improving rapidly, and the original E-TEC line could no longer stand out the way it once did. Evinrude needed more than an upgrade. They needed a revolution. In 2014, they rolled it out. And it looked nothing like anyone expected. In June 2014, at a dealer event in Las Vegas, Evinrude rolled back the curtain on what they called the future of outboards. And you could feel the shock in the room. This wasn't just a facelift. This was a clean sheet design that didn't look, sound, or run like anything else on the water. Did you know the E-TEC G2 was the first mass-produced outboard to come with fully integrated digital steering? No messy hydraulic rams bolted to the transom, no clutter of cables and hoses snaking across the boat. Just a clean, single rigging tube that carried everything. Fuel, controls, and oil straight into the engine. It made boat rigging look as sleek as a luxury car interior. And that bold, angular cowling? You could customize it in dozens of panel and accent color combinations. For the first time, your outboard could match your boat or stand out with a design that screamed personality. But the beauty was more than skin deep. Underneath sat an all-new 3.4-liter V6 stroke with E-TEC direct injection. Evinrude claimed up to 20% more torque and 15% better fuel efficiency than competing four-strokes. There was no break-in period, no oil changes, and up to 5 years or 500 hours between scheduled dealer visits. For boaters used to yearly maintenance bills, this was unheard of. On the water, it wasn't just quick, it leapt onto plane and stayed there, even when loaded with people and gear. Reviewers praised its pulling power, especially for heavy pontoons and offshore fishing rigs. The message was clear. Two-strokes weren't just alive, they were leading the charge again. For a while, the G2 seemed unstoppable, winning fans with its performance and polarizing looks. But as Evinrude would soon learn, building the better engine wasn't always enough to win the market. Next came the years of praise, loyal fans, and the early signs of trouble. When the first E-TEC G2s hit the water, the reaction from boaters and reviewers was electric. Did you know some marine journalists called it the most advanced outboard ever built in its class? It wasn't just hype. The G2 was delivering exactly what Evinrude promised. Owners loved the low-end torque. Instead of needing to rev high like a four-stroke, the G2 could shove a heavy pontoon or offshore fishing boat onto plane almost instantly. That meant less time fighting to get moving and more time cruising at the sweet spot for fuel economy. The integrated power steering made tight docking maneuvers smooth and effortless, and the lack of exposed rigging turned heads at marinas everywhere. Evinrude's marketing team leaned hard into those advantages. They claimed no dealer scheduled maintenance for 5 years or 500 hours, and backed it with one of the industry's longest warranties. They even launched side-by-side comparison ads showing the G2 outrunning, outpulling, and outlasting top four-stroke rivals. For many customers, it was convincing enough to make the switch, and the customization options became a talking point. Owners could match their boat's hull color or go bold with contrasting panels. Suddenly, an outboard wasn't just a piece of machinery, it was a style choice. By 2016, Evinrude had expanded the G2 lineup from the flagship 300 horsepower all the way down to 150 horsepower, bringing the technology to more boats and more buyers. Sales were climbing, and the G2 was carving out a loyal following among those who valued performance over convention. But in the background, the market was shifting in ways that would challenge even the best engineering. Four-stroke competitors were closing the gap, and some of the same features that made the G2 unique were also creating hurdles for growth. That's when the first signs of trouble began to show. By the late 2000s and 10s, the E-TEC G2 had earned its place as one of the most talked-about outboards in the industry. It had die-hard fans who swore nothing else could match its torque, fuel economy, or futuristic style. But did you know that in the same period, the broader outboard market was shifting heavily toward four-stroke technology? The very thing Evinrude had built the G2 to challenge was becoming more dominant than ever. Competitors like Yamaha, Mercury, and Suzuki had been refining their four-stroke designs to a point where they were nearly as quick off the line as two-strokes, whisper quiet at idle, and backed by massive dealer networks. For many boat buyers, especially first-time owners, quiet operation and easy nationwide servicing mattered just as much as raw performance. In that comparison, the G2 sometimes lost ground. Another challenge was the dealer footprint. BRP, Evinrude's parent company, had a smaller marine dealer network than its rivals. In some regions, boaters simply couldn't find a G2-equipped model on the showroom floor, and for those looking to repower an existing boat, the G2's integrated steering, while brilliant from an engineering perspective, was a double-edged sword. It required a full system changeover, which meant higher costs and more complexity for customers not buying a new boat. Then there was the styling. The sharp, angular cowling and bold panel colors were loved by some, but they alienated more traditional buyers who preferred the safe, rounded look of a Yamaha or Mercury. In conservative fishing markets, the G2's appearance could be a deal-breaker before the engine was even started. Evinrude worked to address these challenges. In 2019, they introduced new three-cylinder G2 models in the 115 to 150 horsepower range, hoping to bring their technology into the mid-horsepower segment where most recreational boats lived. These engines shared the same distinctive look and direct injection efficiency, but at a more accessible price point. Despite those efforts, the market's momentum wasn't in Evinrude's favor. The four-stroke tide kept rising, and the G2, for all its innovation, was still swimming upstream. What happened next wasn't just a turning point, it was a full stop. In 2020, Evinrude would make a decision that stunned the entire boating world. In May 2020, the boating world woke up to news that felt impossible. BRP, the parent company of Evinrude, was shutting down outboard production immediately. Not next year, not after a farewell model run, right then and there. Did you know this wasn't just the end of the E-TEC G2, but the end of the Evinrude brand itself, after more than 110 years on the water? The official explanation pointed to COVID-19 supply chain disruptions. The pandemic had made it harder to source parts and maintain production schedules, and BRP said it wanted to focus on other marine ventures, like expanding its pontoon brands. But insiders knew the writing had been on the wall for some time. Evinrude had been fighting uphill against the dominance of four-strokes for years. Yamaha, Mercury, and Suzuki not only had broader dealer networks, but also the benefit of being seen as safe choices for both new boat buyers and repower customers. The G2's integrated steering and bold styling, while innovative, narrowed its appeal in some markets. And with high R&D costs to support a relatively small slice of the market, the numbers just weren't adding up. For loyal G2 owners, the announcement was a gut punch. Many had chosen the engine for its torque, fuel efficiency, and long maintenance intervals, believing they were buying into a future-proof design. Now, questions swirled. Would parts still be available? Would warranties be honored? BRP promised ongoing support for service and parts, and they've kept that commitment so far. But the decision left dealers scrambling. Some had G2-powered boats on order that would never arrive. Others rushed to clear out remaining inventory, knowing these engines were now a finite commodity. What stung most was the speed of it all. One day, the G2 was being promoted as a high-tech alternative to four-strokes. The next, it was a discontinued relic. There was no farewell marketing campaign, no collector's edition, no slow fade, just a sudden final cut-off. In the end, the G2 didn't fail because it couldn't perform. On the water, it was everything Evinrude said it would be. But in the showroom and in the corporate boardroom, performance alone wasn't enough to keep it alive. And yet, even in its abrupt end, the G2's legacy was just beginning to take shape. That's where its story becomes something more than a cautionary tale. The E-TEC G2 may have been short-lived, but its impact on boating is impossible to ignore. Did you know it was one of the very few large two-stroke outboards in the modern era to meet and even exceed the world's toughest emission standards? In a time when most brands declared the two-stroke dead, Evinrude proved it could be cleaner, more fuel-efficient, and more powerful than many four-strokes on the market. Owners who bought them still talk about the difference. The instant torque, the way the boat leapt onto plane, the clean rigging with just a single tube to the transom, it all made boating feel more refined, yet more thrilling. Many also loved the practical perks: no oil changes, no dealer break-in, and fewer maintenance visits compared to rivals. For those who kept up with the proper care, G2s proved to be tough, long-running engines. The styling, as polarizing as it was, also became part of the G2's cult status. In a sea of black, white, and grey cowls, the G2 stood out unapologetically. On the used market today, you can often spot one from across the marina. And among enthusiasts, that uniqueness is a selling point. The technology it introduced has also left a mark. Integrated digital steering, now increasingly common, was still a rarity when the G2 launched. Its rigging simplicity influenced how competitors approached their own high-end models. Even the customizable panels hinted at a future where boat engines might be treated like automotive accessories, blending performance with personal style. For Evinrude as a brand, the G2 became both a swan song and a statement piece. It showed that innovation was still possible in an industry that often moves cautiously. Its failure to survive was less about engineering and more about market realities, dealer reach, customer perception, and timing. Today, clean, low-hour G2s hold their value well, with loyal owners keeping them in top condition. Some believe they could become collector's items, representing the last major two-stroke push in the large outboard segment. So while production ended abruptly, the G2 didn't vanish into obscurity. Instead, it became a conversation starter, a reminder that sometimes the most daring designs don't dominate sales charts, but still earn a permanent place in boating history. And in that sense, the E-TEC G2 isn't just remembered, it's celebrated. If the E-TEC G2's production had continued, it is tempting to imagine what the next generation could have looked like. Did you know BRP engineers were already exploring ways to push the direct injection two-stroke platform further, making it cleaner, lighter, and even quieter? A G3 could have blended the torque of the G2 with noise levels rivaling the best four-strokes, silencing one of the market's biggest objections. There was also room to expand the lineup. The mid-range three-cylinder G2 models introduced in 2019 hinted at the potential for a full spectrum of engines, from small portables to 350 horsepower offshore monsters, all running the same advanced E-TEC technology. Imagine a tournament base boat powered by a G2 400 horsepower V8, or a lightweight 90 horsepower model, delivering the same long service intervals that made the big G2s famous. Hybrid integration could have been another frontier. With electric propulsion gaining momentum, a hybrid two-stroke, using an electric motor for slow-speed cruising and instant two-stroke torque for high-speed runs, could have bridged the gap between tradition and innovation. BRP had the engineering muscle to try it, and the G2's integrated steering and rigging made it an ideal platform for new tech. Cosmetically, there was potential for evolution. The original styling was bold, but future designs could have offered sleeker, more universally appealing shapes while keeping the custom panel concept alive. This might have broadened its appeal beyond performance-focused buyers. And perhaps most importantly, a longer production run could have allowed the dealer network to expand. More boats leaving the factory with G2s from day one would have normalized the technology, making it less of a niche choice and more of a mainstream contender. Of course, none of this happened. The combination of market headwinds, a global pandemic, and corporate strategy meant the G2's life was cut short. But that is what makes it fascinating. It was a glimpse of what outboards could be if the industry took more risks. The G2's future was never written, but its legacy lives on as a what-if in marine engineering. And sometimes, the engines we remember most are not the ones that lasted the longest, but the ones that dared to be different. And that's the rise and sudden fall of the Evinrude E-TEC G2, an engine that proved two strokes could still lead the pack, only to disappear just as it was hitting its stride. It was bold, it was different, and it wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. If you've ever run a G2, you know it wasn't just an outboard, it was an experience. And whether you loved its sharp looks or swore by its torque, there's no denying it earned a place in boating history. So here's my question for you. If BRP brought it back tomorrow, would you buy one? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most daring outboards ever built, hit that like button, subscribe for more marine stories, and share this with someone who still misses the sound of a two-stroke at full throttle. Because engines like this may be gone from production, but they'll never be gone from our memories.